The sterile white walls of my quarters on level 2 seem to close in around me as I write this. Every shadow makes me flinch now, knowing what lurks in the depths below. The gentle hum of the ventilation system, once a comforting white noise, now sounds too similar to those whispers I heard in the deep. I've been staring at these same 4 walls for days, trying to make sense of what happened 12 levels below, but my mind keeps circling back to that fateful elevator ride. Before everything went wrong, I found comfort in the methodical nature of my work in the geological research labs. The Helios station was a marvel of engineering, they told us during orientation. Built into the ancient bones of a dormant Icelandic volcano, it pierced deeper into the Earth's crust than any human structure before it. 30 kilometers down, a number that seemed impressive during our funding presentations, but now fills me with dread. We were so proud of ourselves, thinking we were expanding the boundaries of human knowledge. If only we had understood that some boundaries exist for a reason. The isolation is getting to me. Even in these upper levels, I can feel the weight of the earth above pressing down. The station's architecture, once a testament to human ingenuity, now feels like a prison. The reinforced walls, the pressure-sealed doors, the endless white corridors that branch like veins through the volcanic rock. They're all just elaborate coffins, housing us arrogant researchers who dared to dig too deep. That morning stands out in my memory with cruel clarity. The usual cacophony of machinery seemed muted, as if the station itself was holding its breath. The elevator ride to level 14 had always been long, 15 minutes of descent that felt like being lowered into a grave. But that day, something was different. The air grew thicker with each passing level, becoming almost syrupy in my lungs. The fluorescent lights flickered more frequently than usual, creating strange patterns that seemed to dance at the edge of my vision. Warning signs, all of them, but my scientific curiosity, that cursed drive to know, to understand, pushed me forward. Now, as I sit here in my quarters, surrounded by research papers and geological surveys that seem meaningless in light of what I've discovered, I can't help but wonder if we were meant to find it. If that thing had been waiting patiently through the eons, through the rise and fall of countless species, for someone foolish enough to dig down to its domain. The nightmares haven't stopped. I wake up screaming, my mind filled with impossible geometric patterns, and the memory of that shifting darkness that watched me with an intelligence far beyond human comprehension. My hands shake as I write this account. Not because I expect anyone to believe me, I know they won't. I write because I need to convince myself that what I experienced was real, that I haven't simply lost my mind in the oppressive darkness of the Earth's crust. But even as I form these words, I wonder if madness might be preferable to the truth I discovered in the deep. The elevator's gentle shake as it stopped at level 14 felt different that day, more like a shudder than its usual mechanical movement. As the doors slid open with a hydraulic hiss, I was immediately struck by how wrong everything felt. The corridor lights, typically bright enough to eliminate any shadows, were dimmed to a sickly glow that made the white walls look jaundiced and diseased. The shadows they cast seemed to move with a purpose, writhing like living things when I wasn't looking directly at them. The air hit me like a physical force. It felt thick, almost gelatinous, as if the very atmosphere had begun to congeal. Each breath brought a metallic taste that made my tongue tingle and my teeth ache. It reminded me of licking a battery, but stronger, more invasive, as if the electricity was seeping directly into my bloodstream. The pristine corridors that I had walked countless times now felt alien and hostile. I fumbled for my tablet, desperate for some connection to normality. The screen showed all systems functioning normally. Temperature, pressure, oxygen levels, all within acceptable parameters. But how could that be? The readings contradicted everything my senses were telling me. The usual background symphony of machinery, the hums, whirs, and clicks that were the heartbeat of our facility, had been replaced by something else. Something that pulsed with a rhythm that seemed almost organic, like a massive heart beating somewhere in the depths below us, each beat sending vibrations through the station's skeleton. Those 30 meters from the elevator to the sample collection room might as well have been 30 kilometers. Each step was a battle against an invisible force that seemed to resist my progress. The air had become so thick that moving through it felt like wading through honey. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the cool temperature, and my breath came in short, sharp gasps that echoed too loudly in the hushed corridor. The shadows. God, the shadows. They moved when I wasn't looking directly at them, I'm sure of it. Not the natural movement caused by shifting light sources or walking past static objects. This was deliberate, purposeful. I caught glimpses of them in my peripheral vision, tendrils of darkness that reached out toward me before snapping back when I turned my head. They seemed to be testing, probing, looking for weaknesses. In desperation, I reached for my radio. Protocol dictated that any anomalies should be reported immediately to the control room. But instead of the familiar crackle of static and clear voices of my colleagues, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Whispers, hundreds of them, overlapping and interweaving in a language that hurt my ears to hear. The words, if they were words, seemed to slide off my consciousness like water off oil, refusing to be understood. Yet something in those alien syllables spoke to a deeper part of my brain, awakening instincts that had lain dormant since our species first crawled from the primordial ooze. The sample collection room's sealed door loomed before me, its familiar keypad now as dark and lifeless as a dead man's eyes. Standard protocol, they'd told us during training. All secure areas maintain sealed status unless actively accessed. But this felt different. The dead keypad seemed almost smug in its silence, as if it knew something I didn't. My trembling fingers found the manual override lever, cold and solid against my sweating palm. The hydraulic system's hiss as it released sounded like a warning, or perhaps a last gasp. The wave of cold air that hit me carried scents that had no place this deep underground. Ozone, sharp and electric, mixed with something else. An odor so ancient it seemed to bypass my nose entirely and register directly in the primitive parts of my brain. It smelled like time itself, like the spaces between stars, like something that had waited in darkness since before our sun first ignited. The soft blue glow from the storage units was the only illumination, casting everything in an underwater pallor that made the room feel like a deep-sea trench. Our core samples, perfectly cylindrical specimens of Earth's deep crust that I had handled hundreds of times before, had become something else entirely. They flowed like liquid mercury within their containment tubes, yet somehow maintained their shape, as if held together by forces our instruments couldn't detect. I remember pressing my face close to the nearest container, my scientific curiosity temporarily overwhelming my fear. The patterns forming in the liquid rock were unlike anything I'd ever seen, fractals that seemed to fold in on themselves endlessly, creating impossible depths in samples that should have been solid. Each layer revealed new complexities, new impossibilities, like looking through a microscope into an infinite regression of reality itself. My hands shook violently as I reached for the container. The rational part of my mind screamed at me to stop, to run, to report this impossible phenomenon to my superiors. But I couldn't help myself. Years of scientific training had taught me to observe, to document, to understand. How foolish that training seems now, how inadequate in the face of what we discovered. The moment my fingers made contact with the glass, everything changed. The sample inside reacted like a living thing, the patterns shifting faster, coalescing into something that defied comprehension. An eye formed in the swirling mass, not a human eye, not any kind of eye I'd ever seen in any living creature. It was an organ of perception that operated on principles our biology couldn't begin to understand. And it looked at me. It saw me. Not just my physical form, but everything I was, everything I had ever been or could be. The tablet slipped from my nerveless fingers, clattering to the floor in what should have been a sharp, sudden sound. Instead, the noise seemed to stretch, to distort, as if time itself was becoming as fluid as the samples in their tubes. In the silence that followed, I heard them, thousands of voices whispering in unison, speaking words that couldn't exist in any human language. The blue light from the storage units began to pulse in rhythm with these impossible voices, and I understood with growing horror that what we had found wasn't just strange geology. We had found something that had been waiting, something that had allowed itself to be found. My mind struggled to process what my senses were telling me. The samples in their containers had all changed now, moving with purpose, with intelligence. They weren't just specimens anymore. They were windows into something vast and ancient, something that existed in the deep places of the earth long before our species evolved. And now that we had found it, it had found us too. The absolute darkness that followed the light's failure was unlike anything I'd experienced before. It wasn't just the absence of light, it was as if light itself had become a foreign concept, an impossibility in this new reality I found myself in. My emergency flashlight, when I finally managed to activate it with trembling fingers, seemed to illuminate things that shouldn't be there, casting shadows that moved against the direction of the beam. The door had sealed itself. Not just locked, but sealed as if it had never been designed to open in the first place. The whispers that had been tickling the edges of my consciousness grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, speaking in tongues that predated human language, perhaps predated humanity itself. The temperature plummeted so rapidly that I watched ice crystals form in the beam of my flashlight, creating patterns that seemed to mirror the impossible fractals I'd seen in the core samples. The pressure building in my head was unlike any headache or migraine I'd ever experienced. It felt like something was trying to reshape my consciousness from the inside out, pushing against the boundaries of what my human brain could comprehend. Through the glass wall separating the room from the main drill shaft, I witnessed something that shattered my understanding of reality. The shaft, which should have contained solid rock, had become a void of swirling darkness. But darkness isn't the right word. It was the absence of everything we use to define reality, a space where the laws of physics went to die. Shapes moved within this void, things that my mind couldn't properly process. They flowed like smoke but had mass and substance, twisted like living things but followed geometries that shouldn't be possible in our three-dimensional space. I watched, paralyzed with a mixture of terror and fascination as one of these shapes approached the glass. It didn't break through. That would have been too simple, too normal. Instead, the glass began to flow like the core samples had, its solid structure becoming fluid, creating an opening between our world and whatever lay beyond. The pressure in my head became unbearable, and with it came visions that no human was meant to see. I saw vast underground oceans that had never known light, their waters heavy with dissolved minerals that would have killed any life we knew. I saw cities built in geometries that hurt to look at, their architecture following laws of physics that contradicted everything we thought we knew about the universe. Most terrifying of all, I saw beings that had slumbered in Earth's core since before the first single-celled organism divided, waiting for something, waiting for us. The room, the room. It began to change in ways that defied everything I knew about physical matter. The walls rippled like the surface of a pond, but wrong somehow. Each wave moved in multiple directions simultaneously, creating patterns that made my eyes water when I tried to follow them. The floor beneath my feet seemed to breathe, rising and falling with a rhythm that matched the whispers that now filled my head completely. My flashlight beam no longer behaved like light should. Instead of illuminating surfaces, it seemed to pass through them, revealing layer after layer of reality that had always existed just beyond our perception. The concrete and steel walls of the facility, our proud testament to human engineering, revealed themselves as nothing more than a thin membrane between our reality and something far more vast and incomprehensible. The liquefied core samples had broken free of their containment, flowing together into a pool of shifting metallic substance that defied classification. It wasn't liquid, wasn't solid, wasn't gas. It existed in a state that our language doesn't have words to describe. From this impossible pool, something began to rise. At first, it appeared almost human, a figure of roughly the right size and shape. But as it turned to face me, I saw that its humanity was nothing more than a crude approximation, like a child's drawing of a person. Behind that flimsy mask was something that existed in more dimensions than my mind could process, something that made my sanity feel like a fragile thing ready to shatter at any moment. The changes in my surroundings were horrifying enough, but what was happening to my own body was far worse. Looking down at my hands, I watched my skin take on a metallic sheen, like mercury but alive, pulsing with an inner light that cast no shadows. My fingers moved in ways they shouldn't, bending at impossible angles, sometimes seeming to pass through each other, as if solid matter was becoming as fluid as everything else around me. The strange thing was, I wasn't as terrified as I should have been. A part of me, a growing part, felt curiosity instead of fear. The boundaries between my body and the air around me began to blur, and with that blurring came understanding. What we thought of as solid matter was merely the surface tension of reality, a thin film holding back something far more complex and alive. Every atom of my being hummed with new awareness, as if scales had fallen from eyes I never knew I had. The pressure in my head had transformed into a presence, vast and ancient beyond comprehension. It didn't communicate in words or even images anymore, but in pure concepts that expanded my consciousness in painful but exhilarating ways. Each new understanding was like a key unlocking another door in my mind, revealing rooms that couldn't exist in the architecture of a human brain. I was becoming something else, something more, and the most terrifying part was how right it felt. The figure approached me with movements that belonged in a non-Euclidean nightmare. Each step it took seemed to bend space around it, creating ripples in reality that spread outward like stones dropped in the pond of existence. The floor beneath its feet, if they could be called feet, transformed with each point of contact, reality reshaping itself to accommodate something it was never designed to contain. I stood transfixed, my body refusing to run even as my mind screamed in protest. The being reached for me with an appendage that existed in multiple states simultaneously, there and not there, solid and fluid, past and future, overlapping in ways that made my newly transformed senses real. When it touched me, my mind exploded with information, downloading millennia of history that was never recorded in any human text. I saw the true history of Earth, not the sanitized version we pieced together from rocks and fossils, but the real story written in dimensions beyond our comprehension. Our planet wasn't just a ball of rock circling an unremarkable star. It was an incubator, a crucible designed to facilitate change. What we called life, our precious evolutionary tree with its roots in primordial soup, was nothing more than a side effect of something far older, using our world as a petri dish for transformation. The being communicated without language, showing me visions of others like it sleeping in the deep places of the world. They weren't hostile to humanity, not exactly, but their indifference was almost worse. To them, we were neither threat nor ally, merely potential vessels for change, unconscious participants in an experiment that had been running since before our sun first ignited. I felt myself being drawn toward the void in the drill shaft, that swirling darkness filled with shapes that danced on the edge of comprehension. Part of me, the part that was still clinging to humanity with desperate fingers, wanted to fight, to run, to hide in the comfortable ignorance of my former existence. But another part, growing stronger with each passing moment, yearned to go deeper, to understand more, to complete the transformation that had begun when I first touched that core sample. The choice stretched out before me like a chasm. Remain human and live with the unbearable knowledge of what lurked below, or surrender to the change and become something beyond human comprehension. In that moment of hesitation, suspended between two states of being, I understood with perfect clarity that there was no going back. The very atoms of my body sang with new awareness, and the old world of solid matter and fixed dimensions seemed like a prison I was only now recognizing. The facility's emergency systems activated with a sound that seemed obscene in its mundane familiarity. The klaxons blared, their rhythm a jarring counterpoint to the cosmic pulse that had been rebuilding my consciousness. Emergency lights bathed everything in red, transforming the flowing walls into something that looked like living flesh. The being recoiled from the sudden assault of noise and light, its form becoming unstable, shifting through configurations that hurt to look at. The pressure in my head lessened slightly, enough for my human instincts to reassert themselves. The compelling urge to join them in the void weakened, replaced by a primal drive to survive that cut through the elevated awareness I had been experiencing. I ran. The door had unsealed itself when the emergency systems activated, and I burst through it into the corridor. Behind me, I heard a sound that defied description, like glass breaking. But the glass was reality itself, fracturing along lines that couldn't exist in three-dimensional space. The walls of the corridor rippled and bulged obscenely, and hands, if they could be called hands, reached through from somewhere else trying to pull me back. The elevator waited like a miracle of mundane technology, its doors open as if inviting escape. I threw myself inside, punching the button for level 2 with fingers that still shimmered with an inner light that shouldn't exist. As the doors closed with agonizing slowness, I caught one final glimpse of the corridor. The being stood there, its human disguise melting away to reveal something that existed in angles that hurt my mind to perceive. It raised what might have been an arm in a gesture that pushed one final thought into my transforming brain. Not a threat, but an invitation. Or perhaps a promise. The elevator ride up was 15 minutes of pure psychological torture. I watched the level numbers tick upward with desperate intensity, each one representing another layer of rock between me and whatever dwelled in the deep. But even as I fled upward, I could feel the changes continuing in my body and mind. My skin would shimmer when I wasn't looking directly at it, and my thoughts kept sliding into geometric patterns that had nothing to do with human mathematics. 3 days have passed since my escape, though time feels increasingly meaningless. They've sealed off everything below level 10, using phrases like containment breach in their official reports. Through the grapevine, I've heard whispers of similar incidents at other deep drilling facilities worldwide. The timing isn't coincidental. They're waking up, all of them, and humanity's relentless digging has finally reached deep enough to disturb their slumber. My transformation continues, slower now but unstoppable. The changes in my body are subtle but profound. My skin appears normal most of the time, but catch it in the right light, and you'll see it ripple like liquid metal. In mirrors and windows, my reflection sometimes shifts into shapes that shouldn't be possible, showing me glimpses of what I'm becoming. My dreams are no longer confined to sleep. Even awake, I see those impossible cities in the deep, their architecture following laws of physics that I now understand with frightening clarity. The geometries that once hurt to look at have become beautiful in their complexity, like a mathematician finally understanding a grand unified theory. I know they're coming for me. I've heard their footsteps in the corridor, seen their shadows under my door. The higher-ups are questioning everyone who was on the lower levels that day, but their interrogations are pointless. How do you contain something that exists in more dimensions than you can perceive? How do you stop a transformation that isn't just physical, but fundamental to the nature of reality itself? As I write these final words, I watch my hands shimmer in the fluorescent light. The change is accelerating again, but I'm no longer afraid. Soon, I'll understand everything. The true nature of reality, the purpose of consciousness, the destiny of all living things. Maybe this was inevitable. Maybe humanity's drive to dig deeper, to know more, to transform our environment and ourselves, was just part of their grand experiment. To anyone who finds this account and works in a deep earth facility, watch for the signs. If the shadows begin to move with purpose, if the air thickens like honey, if you hear whispers in languages that hurt your mind to perceive, run. Run before curiosity overwhelms your survival instinct. Run before you learn that everything you know about reality is a comfortable lie we tell ourselves to avoid facing the fluid, shifting truth that lurks beneath. But if you're like me, if you've seen too much already, then you know it's pointless to run. All you can do is embrace the change and hope that whatever we become is better than what we were. The transformation has already begun, not just in me, but in all of humanity. We are standing on the edge of something vast and incomprehensible. And soon, very soon, we will all take the final step into an existence beyond anything we could have imagined. The whispers are getting louder now, and the walls of my quarters have begun to breathe. It's time.